The heiress who hated animals. But what the cat did made headlines in town. The limestone mansion stood like a fortress at the end of Oak Ridge Lane, its wrought iron gates permanently closed to the world outside. For the residents of Maplewood, North Carolina, the Whitmore estate was more landmark than home, a place people drove past on Sunday afternoons, pointing through car windows at manicured hedges and whispering stories about the woman who lived inside. Eleanor Whitmore moved through her home like a ghost. At 62, she had the sharp features of someone who had spent a lifetime perfecting the art of disapproval. Her silver hair was always pulled back in a severe bun, her clothes impeccably tailored in neutral tones. She spoke in clipped sentences, walked with precise steps, and measured her life in spreadsheets and quarterly reports. Mrs. Whitmore, Richard, her loyal house manager of 20 years, approached with caution as Eleanor reviewed financial statements in the East Wing study. About the charity dinner next Tuesday. "I've already drafted my speech," Eleanor replied without looking up. 5 minutes, no personal anecdotes, strictly business. The foundation will announce the endowment, I'll shake the necessary hands, and we'll be done by 9. Richard nodded, knowing better than to suggest anything more. Eleanor Whitmore's reputation for coldness wasn't undeserved. Since her husband Charles's death 8 years earlier, she had retreated further into the emotional fortress she'd been building long before widowhood. The Whitmore Industries board members respected her shrewd business sense, but feared her cutting remarks. Neighbors described her as formidable when feeling generous and insufferable when not. But her most notorious quality, the one that had become almost legendary in Maplewood, was her hatred of animals. Filthy, unpredictable creatures, she'd once announced at a town council meeting when someone suggested allowing pets at the annual Heritage Festival. They shed, they smell, they destroy property. I won't have my event sponsorship associated with such things. The Whitmore Foundation funded everything from the library renovation to the hospital wing, giving Eleanor outsized influence in town affairs. Her disdain for animals was so well known that neighbors walked their dogs on the opposite side of the street when passing her property, and the local animal shelter had long ago stopped sending her donation requests. On this particular April evening, a spring storm had settled over Maplewood. Rain pounded against leaded glass windows as Eleanor finished reviewing the last of the quarterly projections. She glanced at her watch. Nearly 9. Time for her nightly routine. Chamomile tea, 30 minutes of classical music in the library, then bed. Each day was an exercise in precision and control. "That will be all, Richard," she said, organizing papers into perfect stacks. "Please ensure the garden lights are on despite the storm. The Hendersons' new landscaper kept cutting corners last year, and I won't have them thinking our standards have slipped." "Yes, ma'am." Richard hesitated. "There's also the matter of the reunion committee. They've requested use of the East Garden again for the alumni breakfast, same as last year." Eleanor frowned. She despised these community intrusions, but maintained them for the sake of appearances. "Very well, but remind them, no children under 12 and absolutely no animals." "The last time someone brought a puppy that urinated on a 300-year-old stone bench." "Of course." Richard nodded and retreated from the room. Eleanor moved through the silent house toward the kitchen. The mansion's 15 rooms were impeccably maintained but largely unused. Fresh flowers appeared weekly in crystal vases, but no one stopped to smell them. Antique furniture gleamed with polish, but no one sat on the cushions. It was a museum, not a home. The rain intensified as she prepared her tea. Thunder cracked across the sky, momentarily illuminating the kitchen garden outside the window. Eleanor stared into the darkness, feeling the familiar weight of emptiness press against her chest. She would never admit it, not even to herself, but sometimes the silence of the house felt like it might swallow her whole. Before we continue with the story, I want to ask you for something very special. Please subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and leave a comment. Every single action makes a difference and helps our project grow. The security system chimed, alerting her to movement at the front gate. Frowning, she checked her phone for the camera feed. Through the blur of rain, she could make out a small, dark shape huddled against the ironwork, probably debris blown by the wind. But when lightning flashed again, she saw it clearly. A cat, soaked through, pressed against the gate. "Ridiculous," she muttered, setting down her teacup with a sharp clink. She dialed Richard's extension. "There's a stray cat at the front gate. Please remove it immediately." 5 minutes later, her phone rang. "Mrs. Whitmore." Richard's voice sounded strained. "I've attempted to shoo the animal away, but it seems determined to stay. It's quite wet. Perhaps if we—" "I don't care if it's growing gills, Richard. I will not have strays making my property their home. Call animal control if necessary. They're closed until morning, ma'am. Eleanor pinched the bridge of her nose. Then use the garden hose. The silence on the other end spoke volumes. In 20 years, Richard had never openly disobeyed her, but his hesitation now bordered on insubordination. It's just a night of rain, Richard, she said, her voice hardening. Animals survive in the wild every day. That's where they belong. Yes, ma'am. After hanging up, Eleanor found herself unable to focus on her book. The cat bothered her. Not its welfare, she told herself, but its presumption. How dare it choose her gate of all places? The symbolism wasn't lost on her. A creature seeking shelter from a woman known for providing none. Sleep eluded her that night. She told herself it was the storm, not thoughts of the rain-soaked animal. When morning finally came, clear and bright after the rain, Eleanor discovered Richard outside, placing a small saucer of milk near the garden shed. The animal is still here, he explained, looking slightly embarrassed. I thought it might be hungry. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. You're encouraging it to stay. No, ma'am, just showing a bit of humanity. The word hung between them, heavy with implication. Humanity is reserved for humans, Richard. That's the definition. She turned to go, then stopped. Where is it now? Richard nodded toward the ornamental cherry tree at the edge of the front lawn. Curled beneath it, barely visible in the morning shadows, was a grey cat with unusual amber eyes. Even from a distance, Eleanor could feel its gaze following her. It's watching me, she said. Yes, ma'am. Cats are observant creatures. It's unsettling. Call the shelter when they open. I want it gone by noon. But when Eleanor returned from her morning meeting with the foundation board, the cat was still there. It had moved to the stone steps leading to the garden, grooming itself in a patch of sunlight. Its fur, now dry, was a deep charcoal grey that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Only those amber eyes burned bright, following her as she walked past. Richard, she called, not taking her eyes off the animal. Why is this creature still on my property? Richard appeared from the garage, looking uncharacteristically flustered. The shelter is at capacity, ma'am. They can't take any more animals until next week. I called 3 private rescues as well, but then call the county. Have it removed. Richard cleared his throat. The county facility has a 90% euthanasia rate for adult cats, ma'am. Eleanor turned to face him, suddenly understanding his reluctance. You think I care what happens to it? I think, Richard said carefully, that you don't want to be the person who sends an animal to its death over a temporary inconvenience. Eleanor felt her face flush. Don't presume to know what I want, Richard. That's not in your job description. No, ma'am. He lowered his eyes. Should I call the county facility then? The cat had stopped grooming and was watching their exchange with unnerving intensity. Eleanor felt an irrational anger building inside her. Why should this animal make her feel judged in her own home? Leave it, she snapped. If it has the sense to move on by tomorrow, fine. If not, call the county. That night, unable to sleep, Eleanor found herself at the kitchen window, staring out at the moonlit garden. The cat sat on the stone bench, still as a statue, those amber eyes reflecting the security lights, looking at her, waiting. Eleanor realized with unsettling clarity that she was being observed, not just seen but studied. A strange feeling crawled up her spine, a sensation she hadn't experienced in years. Vulnerability. What do you want? She whispered to the glass. The cat simply blinked, slow and deliberate, as if to say it had all the time in the world to wait for her answer. What Eleanor didn't know as she finally turned away from the window was that this silent standoff marked the beginning of an unexpected journey. The cat would not leave the next day or the day after. It would stay, watching and waiting until it broke through defenses built over a lifetime, and in doing so it would change everything. By the 3rd day, Eleanor had given the cat a name, though she would never admit this to Richard or anyone else. The name had come to her during breakfast, when sunlight streamed through the east windows, catching the cat's eyes as it sat on the garden wall. For a moment, those eyes had blazed like molten gold. Aurelian, she had whispered, recalling the Latin word for golden from her college days. A fitting name for an unwanted guest with eyes the color of ancient coins. Eleanor had instructed Richard to stop feeding the animal, hoping hunger would drive it away. Yet Aurelian remained, sometimes disappearing for hours before returning to resume his silent vigil. Despite herself, Eleanor found her daily routine adjusting to include checking whether the cat was present. She told herself it was merely to confirm when the nuisance would finally be gone. The animal is still here, she mentioned to Richard a week after the storm, feigning irritation while sipping her morning coffee. "Yes, ma'am," Richard replied evenly. "He seems quite settled." "He?" Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "You've gotten close enough to determine that?" A hint of a smile crossed Richard's face. "He allowed me within petting distance yesterday. No collar, but he's clearly been someone's companion before. Too well socialized to be feral. Well, he can go be someone else's companion now. The spring gala committee will be here this afternoon, and I won't have them thinking I've become some sort of," she waved her hand dismissively, "cat person." But when the committee members arrived, 6 well-dressed women from Maplewood's oldest families, Aurelian made his most brazen move yet. As the women crossed the gravel driveway toward the front entrance, the cat appeared from beneath a hydrangea bush and fell into step beside them, tail high as if escorting honored guests. Eleanor, watching from the foyer window, felt a flash of mortification that quickly turned to something like fascination when Mrs. Harrington, the committee chair, bent down to stroke the cat's head. "Why, Eleanor?" the woman exclaimed upon entering. "I had no idea you'd gotten a cat. How perfectly charming." Eleanor opened her mouth to correct her, to explain that the animal was a stray she was trying to remove, but something stopped her. Perhaps it was the genuine warmth in Mrs. Harrington's voice, warmth that had been absent in their interactions for years. "He's new," Eleanor said instead, watching as Aurelian sat regally on the front step, grooming his paw as if he'd completed an important social duty. The meeting progressed more smoothly than any Eleanor could remember. The usual tension, the careful tiptoeing around her sharp edges, seemed diminished. When tea was served in the garden room, Eleanor noticed Aurelian watching through the glass doors. "Your cat seems very attentive," observed Harriet Bennett, a retired school principal who had always been politely distant with Eleanor. "What's his name?" Again, Eleanor hesitated. To name the cat would be to acknowledge a connection she wasn't ready to admit. "He doesn't have one yet," she replied, surprising herself with the yet. "He simply appeared during last week's storm." "Sometimes they choose us," Harriet said, smiling. "My Oscar walked into my classroom 15 years ago and decided I was his person. Best decision I never made." After the committee left, Eleanor found herself alone in the garden room, watching as Aurelian stretched out on the warm flagstones outside. There was something almost deliberate in his casualness, as if he knew exactly how to make himself belong in a space that wasn't his. "I'm not looking for company," she said aloud, feeling slightly ridiculous for addressing a cat through glass. "Particularly not yours." Aurelian yawned in response, showing sharp white teeth before settling his head on his paws, eyes half closed but still watching her. That night, Eleanor dreamed of Charles. They were sitting in the garden as they used to do on summer evenings, except in the dream Aurelian was there too, curled contentedly on Charles's lap. Her husband's hands, those gentle hands she still missed, stroked the cat's fur as he smiled at Eleanor. "You see," he said in the dream, "it's not so difficult to let something in." She woke with tears on her cheeks, something that hadn't happened in years. The dream left her unsettled, vulnerable in a way she couldn't control. She dressed with particular care that morning, armoring herself in a tailored grey suit despite having no meeting scheduled. "Richard," she said when he arrived at 8, "contact the animal shelter again. See if they have space now." If Richard was surprised by her renewed determination, after a week of apparent tolerance, he didn't show it. "Yes, ma'am. Though I should mention that Harriet Bennett called this morning. She's offered to help with any supplies or care the cat might need. She volunteers at the shelter and—" "This is not our cat, Richard," Eleanor interrupted sharply. "I have no intention of acquiring supplies or care instructions." "Of course, ma'am." Richard's tone remained neutral. Mrs. Bennett also mentioned that the shelter is still over capacity due to kitten season. She suggested that if you wanted the cat rehomed, she could put an advertisement in the community newsletter. Eleanor pressed her lips together. The idea of having her name associated with a cat adoption notice felt absurd, like something from another woman's life entirely. "Fine," she said finally. "Tell her to do what she thinks best. Just ensure that the creature is gone by the end of the month." But as April turned to May, Aurelian showed no signs of leaving. In fact, he grew bolder by the day. Eleanor would find him in new locations around the property, perched on the garden bench where she took her morning coffee, stretched across the driveway as she returned from meetings, sitting outside the library windows during her evening reading, always watching, always waiting. The first real turning point came on a warm evening in early May. Eleanor had spent the day in tense negotiations with potential investors, returning home with a pounding headache and frayed nerves. As she stepped from her car, the financial documents she'd been reviewing slipped from her hands, scattering across the driveway in the evening breeze. Eleanor cursed under her breath, dropping to her knees to gather the papers before they blew away. Her head throbbed, and for a moment she felt overwhelmed by a wave of exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness, a bone-deep weariness she rarely allowed herself to acknowledge. Then, something extraordinary happened. Aurelian appeared and began batting at the papers, not playfully but deliberately, stopping them from blowing further away. He pushed one important contract toward her with his paw, then sat beside it, looking at her expectantly. Eleanor stared at the cat in disbelief. "That was helpful," she said, the words feeling strange on her tongue. Aurelian blinked slowly at her, then stood and walked a few paces toward the house before stopping to look back, as if expecting her to follow. That night, Eleanor left a small saucer of water on the back porch. She told herself it was simply humane. The temperatures had been unusually high that week. It meant nothing more. But something had shifted, almost imperceptibly. When Eleanor looked out the kitchen window the next morning and didn't see Aurelian in any of his usual spots, she felt a flicker of concern before quickly dismissing it. Good riddance, she told herself. The cat had finally moved on. Then Richard appeared at the kitchen door looking uncomfortable. "Mrs. Whitmore, I believe you should see this." He led her to the library, her sanctuary, the one room in the house where she spent time not working but simply being. The door was slightly ajar, though Eleanor was certain she'd closed it the night before. Inside, curled up on the antique reading chair by the fireplace, Charles's chair, was Aurelian. He was sound asleep, his grey body a stark contrast against the burgundy upholstery. Eleanor's first instinct was outrage. This was an invasion, a violation of boundaries she had carefully maintained. She opened her mouth to demand that Richard remove the animal immediately, but the words didn't come. Instead, she found herself moving quietly into the room, approaching the sleeping cat with cautious steps. Aurelian opened his eyes as she drew near, regarding her without alarm or apology. There was something in that steady gaze that seemed to ask a question. "Will you send me away from here too?" Eleanor felt something crack inside her chest, a hairline fracture in the walls she had built. Without quite meaning to, she reached out and let her fingertips brush against the soft fur behind Aurelian's ear. The cat leaned into her touch, a deep purr rumbling from his throat. "He got in through the library window," Richard explained from the doorway. "I left it open a crack to air out the room after the cleaners used that new polish. I apologize, Mom." Eleanor withdrew her hand, embarrassed to be caught in this moment of weakness. "It's fine, Richard. Just ensure it doesn't happen again." But later that day, Eleanor found herself returning to the library, ostensibly to review foundation papers. Aurelian was gone, but when she sat in her usual chair, she noticed grey hairs on Charles's seat. Instead of calling for the housekeeper to clean them, she simply brushed them away with her hand, feeling their softness between her fingers. That evening, the neighborhood association sent an email announcing its monthly meeting. The primary agenda item, discussion of increasing stray animal population and proposed solutions. Eleanor stared at her computer screen, knowing what would be expected. The Whitmore Foundation funded half the neighborhood beautification projects. She would be asked to support stricter measures against strays, perhaps even funding for removal services. It was the position she had always taken. As she closed her laptop, she caught sight of movement in the garden. Aurelian was stalking something in the grass, a mouse or chipmunk perhaps. His movements were precise, controlled, yet there was a grace to them that Eleanor couldn't help but admire. She thought of how he had helped gather her papers, how he had chosen Charles's chair of all places to rest, how his eyes seemed to see past her carefully constructed facade. For the first time in years, Eleanor Whitmore found herself questioning the certainty of her convictions. "Aurelian," she whispered, testing the name aloud for the first time. The cat's ears twitched, and he turned to look at her through the window, as if recognizing his name. Eleanor didn't know it yet, but naming him aloud was like opening a door she wouldn't be able to close again. The first time Eleanor deliberately fed Aurelian was on a Tuesday morning in mid-May. She had woken earlier than usual, troubled by dreams she couldn't quite remember. The house felt especially empty, its silence no longer comfortable but oppressive. From the kitchen window she spotted Aurelian sitting beneath the oak tree, watching a robin hop across the lawn. Without analyzing her actions too closely, Eleanor placed a small piece of leftover salmon on a saucer and carried it outside. "Here," she said, setting the dish down a few feet from the cat. "I assume you're hungry." Aurelian approached cautiously, sniffed the offering, then looked up at Eleanor with those penetrating amber eyes before delicately eating the fish. When he finished, he sat back and began grooming his paws, the picture of dignity. "That's all," Eleanor said firmly. "Don't expect this to become a habit." But of course it did. The morning feeding became a ritual neither acknowledged, Eleanor pretending it was merely a practical way to dispose of leftovers, Aurelian accepting the meals with a regal nod that somehow never seemed grateful enough to offend her pride. Richard observed this development with careful neutrality, though Eleanor occasionally caught him hiding a smile. She chose not to comment on the small bowls of water that appeared in shady spots around the garden, or the fact that the gardeners had been instructed to check for a cat before using any equipment. By the end of May, Harriet Bennet had become a regular visitor, ostensibly to check on Aurelian's health, but increasingly staying for tea with Eleanor. Their conversations, awkward at first, gradually evolved into something that almost resembled friendship. "He's quite healthy," Harriet reported after one of her visits. "A bit on the thin side, but no signs of disease or injury. I'd estimate he's about 3 years old." Eleanor nodded, pretending the information was of only passing interest. "Has anyone responded to your notice about adopting him?" Harriet hesitated. "There have been a few inquiries. The Martins on Elm Street are looking for a companion for their elderly cat, and the new veterinarian in town has space in her home." An unexpected tightness gripped Eleanor's chest. She took a careful sip of tea to hide her reaction. "I see. Well, as I've said, I'm not in a position to keep a pet. My lifestyle doesn't accommodate animals." "Of course," Harriet agreed too quickly, "though I must say he seems quite attached to this place. Cats choose their homes, you know. They're territorial creatures." "This is not his territory," Eleanor said, but the words lacked conviction. That night, Eleanor found herself researching cats on her iPad, their habits, their needs, their psychology. She told herself it was merely to understand the intruder better, to find more effective ways of encouraging him to leave. But when she caught herself reading an article titled "Signs Your Cat Trusts You," she shut the device with a snap. The next morning brought an unexpected development. As Eleanor prepared for a board meeting, Richard appeared at her office door looking concerned. "Mrs. Whitmore, there's a situation with the cat." Eleanor felt a jolt of alarm she couldn't quite rationalize. "What kind of situation?" "He appears to be, well, digging at something near the east garden wall. He's been at it since dawn, quite persistently. He's uncovered what looks like a pipe, and there seems to be moisture around it." 15 minutes later, Eleanor stood in her garden clothes, a pair of rarely worn slacks and a simple blouse, staring at a small excavation where Aurelian had indeed exposed a leaking irrigation pipe. The cat sat nearby, watching as if satisfied with his work. "The main water line runs right beneath this," the emergency plumber explained after examining the area. "If this small leak had gone unnoticed, it would eventually have compromised the foundation of the east wing. You're lucky your cat found it." "He's not my—" Eleanor began, then stopped. She looked at Aurelian, who was calmly grooming himself, as if saving her tens of thousands of dollars in foundation repairs was simply part of his daily routine. That afternoon, she cancelled her attendance at the neighborhood association meeting for the first time in 15 years. The incident with the pipe made the local community newsletter, a small paragraph titled "Feline Hero Saves Historic Whitmore Estate." Eleanor read it with mixed emotions, uncomfortable with being the subject of such personal attention, yet undeniably proud of Aurelian's inexplicable perception. Neighbors she barely knew began stopping her in town to ask about her cat. Children appeared at the iron gates, calling Aurelian's name, which Harriet had apparently shared freely throughout the community. Eleanor found herself fielding questions about him at the grocery store, at church, at foundation meetings. What breed is he? Does he do any tricks? Will he be making an appearance at the Heritage Festival? This last question came from Mrs. Harrington during a planning committee meeting, and it caught Eleanor entirely off guard. "I beg your pardon," Mrs. Harrington smiled. "We thought it would be lovely to have Aurelian as a special guest. The children have been asking. Perhaps in the local heroes tent, alongside the firefighters and the boy who saved his neighbor from choking." Eleanor stared at her. "You want to put a cat in the local heroes tent?" "Well, he did save a historic landmark," Mrs. Harrington pointed out. "And frankly, Eleanor, it's the first time in years I've seen this community take an interest in anything connected to the Whitmore estate. People are curious about the cat who melted the Ice Queen's heart." The words stung with unexpected sharpness. "I was not aware that was my reputation," Eleanor said stiffly. Mrs. Harrington had the grace to look embarrassed. That came out more harshly than intended, but you must admit, you've kept people at a distance. The cat has humanized you somewhat. On her drive home, Eleanor turned those words over in her mind. Had she really become so cold that it took an animal to make her seem human? The thought was disturbing, yet she couldn't entirely dismiss it. When she arrived home, she found Richard in the garden with Harriet. Between them, on the stone bench, sat Aurelian, tolerating Harriet's gentle examination of his paws. "Just checking for any injuries from his excavation project," Harriet explained. "He seems to have quite the talent for property maintenance." Eleanor approached, watching as the cat submitted to the examination with dignified tolerance. "The plumber said he saved me considerable expense and inconvenience." "Cats are intuitive," Harriet said, stroking Aurelian's head. "They sense things we don't." Later, alone in the library, Eleanor found herself seated in Charles's chair for the first time since his death. It had been his favorite spot, a worn leather armchair positioned to catch the afternoon light perfectly for reading. She had preserved it like a museum exhibit, untouched and unused. Now she ran her hands over the armrests where his hands had rested, feeling the leather warm beneath her touch. A strange sense of permission filled her, as if by allowing Aurelian to claim this spot, she had somehow granted herself the same right. When Aurelian appeared in the doorway, she didn't pretend to be surprised. Somehow, she had known he would come. He crossed the room with unhurried steps and jumped onto her lap without invitation, turning in a circle before settling down, his weight warm and solid against her legs. Eleanor sat frozen for a moment, then tentatively placed her hand on his back. The rumble of his purr vibrated against her fingers. "I suppose we have a few things in common," she said quietly. "Neither of us is particularly good at asking for what we want. We just take up positions and wait for others to accommodate us." Aurelian's purr deepened. "Charles would have liked you," she continued, surprised by how easily the words came. "He always wanted pets. I was the one who refused." She paused, stroking the cat's soft fur. "I told him they were messy and unpredictable. The truth was, I couldn't bear the thought of loving something that would inevitably leave." A memory surfaced. Charles, 10 years younger, his face alight with hope as he showed her a puppy in the window of a pet store, her sharp refusal, the light in his eyes dimming as he turned away. That night, Eleanor dreamed again of Charles. This time they were walking together through the garden. Aurelian led the way, stopping occasionally to look back at them. "You're afraid," Charles said in the dream. "Of what?" she asked. "Of finding out how much room is left in your heart." She woke with his words echoing in her mind, feeling both disturbed and strangely hopeful. When she went downstairs, she found Aurelian sitting by the front door, looking at her expectantly. "What is it?" she asked. The cat meowed, a sound she had rarely heard from him, and pawed at the door. Curious, Eleanor opened it. Aurelian darted outside and down the front steps, stopping to look back at her. "I'm not dressed for gardening," she protested, still in her silk robe. Aurelian meowed again, more insistently. With a sigh, Eleanor slipped on the garden shoes by the door and followed the cat across the dewy lawn. He led her to the iron gates that separated the estate from the street, gates that remained closed to the community most days of the year. A small face peered through the bars, a girl of about 9 with unruly red hair and a smattering of freckles. "Before we continue with the story, I want to ask you for something very special. Please subscribe to the channel, give this video a like and leave a comment. Every single action makes a difference and helps our project grow." "Is that him?" the child asked, eyes wide. "Is that Aurelian?" Eleanor stiffened, uncomfortable with this intrusion. "Yes. And you are?" "I'm Sophie. I live down the street. Everyone's talking about your hero cat." The girl pressed her face closer to the bars. "Can I pet him?" Eleanor's instinct was to refuse, to send the child away, to retreat back into the safety of her controlled environment. But Aurelian was already approaching the gate, tail high, allowing the small fingers to reach through and stroke his head. "He likes behind his ears best," Eleanor heard herself saying. Then, after a moment's hesitation, "Would you like to come in and meet him properly?" The words surprised her as much as they did the child, whose face lit up with delight. "Really, can I?" Eleanor found herself unlatching the gate for the first time in months. "Just for a few minutes. I'm sure your parents wouldn't want you wandering into strangers' gardens." "My mom knows I'm here," Sophie said, skipping inside. "She said I could ask to see the hero cat, but not to bother you too much because you're very important and busy." "Did she now?" Eleanor murmured, wondering what else was said about her in the homes along her street. Sophie spent 15 minutes playing with Aurelian in the garden, her laughter ringing through the morning air, a sound that had not been heard on the estate grounds in years. Eleanor watched, oddly moved by the child's uninhibited joy and Aurelian's gentle patience. When Sophie finally left, promising to return with her mother's permission, Eleanor found herself standing at the open gate, looking out at the street where neighbors walked dogs, pushed strollers, and carried grocery bags. Normal life happening just beyond her walls. Aurelian rubbed against her ankles, then sat beside her, gazing out at the same scene. "I suppose you think you're very clever," Eleanor said softly, "leading children to my gate like some sort of feline Pied Piper." But as she finally closed the gate and turned back toward the house, she left it unlocked for the first time in 8 years. That afternoon, Eleanor received an email that would test her newfound flexibility. The subject line read, "Urgent Neighborhood Association Vote on Stray Animal Ordinance." The proposed ordinance would implement strict regulations on stray animals in the neighborhood, including immediate removal and potential euthanasia for unclaimed strays after just 3 days. The association was seeking the Whitmore Foundation's support and Eleanor's personal endorsement. 3 weeks earlier, she would have provided both without hesitation. Now she stared at the screen, thinking of Aurelian, who technically remained a stray despite his residence on her property. She thought of the shelter at capacity with kitten season. She thought of Harriet's dedication to finding homes for unwanted animals. For the first time in memory, Eleanor Whitmore found herself on the opposite side of an issue from the neighborhood's old guard. The realization was both terrifying and strangely exhilarating. With a decisiveness that surprised even her, she picked up the phone and dialed Harriet's number. "Harriet, it's Eleanor Whitmore. I'd like to discuss an alternative proposal for the stray animal situation, one that doesn't involve euthanasia." As she spoke, Aurelian jumped onto her desk and settled himself directly on top of her keyboard, amber eyes fixed on her face with what seemed like approval. The breach in Eleanor's wall was widening by the day. By early June, the transformation of the Whitmore estate was subtle but unmistakable. The iron gates now stood open during daylight hours. Children sometimes gathered on the edge of the lawn, hoping for glimpses of Aurelian, who had become something of a local celebrity. Eleanor found herself nodding to neighbors when she collected her mail, even occasionally engaging in brief conversations about the weather or community events. Inside the mansion, more significant changes were taking place. Aurelian now had designated food and water bowls in the kitchen. A plush bed occupied a corner of the library, though he still preferred Charles's chair, or increasingly, Eleanor's lap. Scratching posts had appeared in several rooms, a concession to preserving the antique furniture that Eleanor justified as practical asset management. But most profound was the change in Eleanor herself. The rigid schedule she had maintained for decades now bent to accommodate Aurelian's needs and preferences. She found herself leaving board meetings earlier, delegating tasks she once would have handled personally, and, most shocking to those who knew her well, declining evening events to return home. "Mrs. Whitmore," her assistant Diane remarked during a foundation meeting, "you haven't confirmed your attendance at the governor's fundraiser next week." Eleanor glanced up from her notes. "I'll be sending a donation, but I won't attend in person." "But you've never missed the governor's annual event," Diane protested. "It's where we secure the matching grants for the literacy program." Eleanor hesitated, unwilling to admit that the thought of leaving Aurelian alone overnight no longer appealed to her. "I've found that sometimes our physical presence isn't as valuable as our financial support. Richard can represent the foundation this year." The news that Eleanor Whitmore had declined the governor's fundraiser spread through Maplewood's social circles like wildfire. Whispers began, first among the neighborhood association members, then among the business community, and finally reaching the local paper. "Is everything all right with Eleanor?" Mrs. Harrington asked Harriet over lunch at the country club. "First the stray animal ordinance, now skipping the governor's event. It's not like her." Harriet smiled knowingly. "I think she's finally finding balance. That cat has been good for her." "A cat?" Mrs. Harrington repeated incredulously. "Charles tried for years to soften her edges, and all it took was a stray cat." "Sometimes," Harriet said thoughtfully, "we're more willing to open our hearts to creatures who don't remind us of our past disappointments." The whispers might have remained just that, quiet speculation among Maplewood's elite, if not for what happened at the Whitmore Foundation's quarterly review meeting. Eleanor had arranged for the board members to gather at the mansion rather than the usual downtown conference room, ostensibly to review renovations to the East Wing that would soon host community events. Midway through the financial presentation, as investment returns were being discussed, Aurelian strolled into the boardroom and jumped directly onto the polished mahogany table. The board members froze, papers in hand, clearly expecting Eleanor's swift removal of the animal. Instead, she merely said, "Excuse me a moment," and gently lifted Aurelian from the table, setting him on an empty chair beside her own. The cat settled in contentedly, as Eleanor continued the meeting without further comment, occasionally reaching over to stroke his fur when reviewing particularly dry financial data. Marcus Dunham, the Foundation's oldest board member and Charles's former business partner, couldn't contain himself after the meeting. "Eleanor," he said as others were leaving, "I've known you for 30 years, and I've never seen you like this." She raised an eyebrow. "Like what, Marcus?" "Relaxed. Almost happy." He glanced at Aurelian, who was now supervising the catering staff as they cleared coffee cups. Charles would be pleased. Eleanor felt a familiar pang at the mention of her late husband, but it was softer now, tempered by time and perhaps by Aurelian's presence. "You think he would approve of my hosting a cat in our board meetings?" "I think he would approve of you finding joy in something beyond balance sheets," Marcus replied. "The Foundation's doing better than ever under your leadership, but for the first time I don't think it's the only thing in your life. That's a good thing, Eleanor." The conversation might have remained private, if not for the presence of Lauren Hayes, a junior reporter for the Maplewood Gazette, who had been invited to cover the Foundation's new community initiative. She had overheard the exchange and saw something more significant than a local charity story. 3 days later, the Gazette ran a feature with the headline, "The Cat Who Opened the Iron Gates, How a Stray Changed Maplewood's Most Formidable Resident." The article detailed Aurelian's arrival during the spring storm, his discovery of the leaking pipe, and his gradual effect on both the Whitmore estate and its owner. It quoted neighbors who described seeing Eleanor in her garden with the cat, mentioned the children who now visited the once forbidding gates, and noted her surprising opposition to the stray animal ordinance. The story might have remained local, if not for the timing. That same week, a national magazine had been researching a feature on wealthy philanthropists adapting to modern community engagement. The reporter, searching for examples, stumbled upon the Gazette article and contacted Lauren Hayes. By the end of June, Eleanor's transformation had become a human interest story picked up by several regional newspapers and a popular morning show. "The Ice Queen and the Stray" was how one particularly melodramatic headline put it, much to Eleanor's dismay. "This is absurd," she told Richard, tossing the newspaper aside. 15 years of foundation work, millions in charitable contributions, and what finally gets attention, a cat. Richard smiled faintly. "People connect with stories about change, Mom, especially unexpected ones." Eleanor sighed, looking out the window to where Aurelian was stalking butterflies in the garden. "I haven't changed that much." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. The previous evening, she had hosted Harriet and 3 other shelter volunteers for dinner to discuss alternatives to the stray ordinance. They had sat in the formal dining room, a space unused since Charles's funeral reception, eating and laughing as they drafted a proposal for a community-funded trap-neuter return program. The shelter director, a young woman named Maya with bright purple hair and multiple earrings, someone Eleanor would never have associated with in the past, had brought photographs of cats recently placed in homes. "We're at capacity now," Maya explained, "but if we had funding for a temporary overflow facility during kitten season, we could save dozens more each year." Eleanor, to her own surprise, found herself asking practical questions about costs, staffing, and logistics. By the end of the evening, she had committed the Foundation to a matching grant program for the shelter expansion. As the women were leaving, Maya had hesitated at the door. "Mrs. Whitmore, I have to admit, you're nothing like I expected." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "And what did you expect, Ms. Chen?" Maya blushed. "We used to call you the Dragon Lady at the shelter, after you shut down our adoption event at the Heritage Festival 3 years ago." "Sir," Eleanor said, remembering the incident with a twinge of shame. "Well, perspectives can change." "Thanks to Aurelian," Maya said, smiling at the cat who had appeared to supervise the departures. Now, facing Richard across the breakfast table, Eleanor couldn't deny the truth in his observation. She had changed. The question was whether it was for the better, and whether she was prepared for what these changes might mean for her carefully ordered life. The answer came sooner than she expected. That afternoon, an email arrived from Marcus Dunham with a subject line that made her heart sink. "Investor concerns. Urgent discussion needed." The message was diplomatic but clear. Several major donors to the foundation had expressed reservations about Eleanor's recent media coverage and community initiatives. The conservative business leaders who had always supported the Whitmore Foundation were uncomfortable with her new public image and her shift in priorities. They wanted assurances that the foundation would maintain its traditional focus on economic development rather than emotional causes like animal welfare. The final paragraph delivered the ultimatum without stating it directly. Some board members feel that a sabbatical might benefit both you and the foundation while these new directions are evaluated. Eleanor sat back in her chair, a cold feeling settling in her stomach. The foundation was her life's work, her connection to Charles, her identity in the community, her purpose for the past 15 years. The thought of stepping away, even temporarily, felt like having the ground disappear beneath her feet. As if sensing her distress, Aurelian appeared and jumped onto her desk, placing one paw on her hand as she gripped the mouse. His amber eyes held her gaze, unwavering and calm. "This is your fault, you know," she told him, her voice lacking any real accusation. "You've made me soft." Aurelian blinked slowly, a gesture she had come to recognize as affection. Eleanor sighed, scratching behind his ears. "The thing is, I'm not sure I want to go back to who I was before." That evening, Eleanor cancelled her plans and instead sat in the garden as twilight settled over Maplewood. Aurelian explored the flower beds nearby, occasionally returning to rub against her ankles before continuing his patrol. The summer air was heavy with the scent of roses and freshly cut grass. For the first time in years, Eleanor allowed herself to think about Charles not as the co-founder of their empire or the public figure, but as the man who had loved gardening and classical music and Sunday mornings with coffee on the porch. The man who had wanted a dog, had suggested children, had gently urged her to loosen her grip on schedules and spreadsheets. "What would you do?" she asked aloud, looking up at the darkening sky. "Would you fight the board? Or would you finally admit that there might be more to life than what we built?" Aurelian appeared at her feet, something in his mouth. He dropped it in her lap, a small, worn photograph that had somehow been left in the garden. Eleanor picked it up, turning it toward the light from the house. It was a picture of Charles she hadn't seen in years, taken during their first summer in the house. He was laughing, his arm around a much younger Eleanor who was actually smiling, a real smile that reached her eyes, not the practiced one she used for public events. Eleanor felt tears threatening. Where had this photo come from? Had it blown from an album left open? Had Richard been reviewing old photographs? Or was it simply that the universe, or whatever force had sent Aurelian to her gate that rainy night, was answering her question? She tucked the photo into her pocket and stood, making a decision that would have been unthinkable 3 months earlier. "Richard," she called as she entered the house, Aurelian trotting behind her, "please clear my schedule for the next 2 weeks and contact Miss Chen at the animal shelter. Tell her I'd like to discuss that overflow facility first thing tomorrow." The next morning, Eleanor drafted a response to Marcus that was both gracious and firm. She would take a sabbatical, not from her values, but from the constraints that had limited them. The foundation would continue its economic initiatives, but it would also expand into new areas that reflected a more holistic approach to community well-being. After much reflection, she wrote, "I believe Charles would have approved of this evolution. The Whitmore name has always stood for prosperity in Maplewood, but true prosperity isn't measured solely in financial terms." As she pressed send, Aurelian jumped onto her lap, purring loudly. Eleanor stroked his soft fur, feeling strangely liberated by a decision that, just months ago, would have terrified her. "Well," she said to the cat, "it seems we're both strays now, in our own way, making our own paths." Aurelian stretched contentedly, as if to say this had been the plan all along. What neither of them knew was that the most challenging test and the most public demonstration of Eleanor's transformation was yet to come. The Maplewood Heritage Festival had been a town tradition for over a century. Held each year on the third weekend of September, it brought together local businesses, artisans, and community organizations for 3 days of celebration. As the town's most prominent benefactor, Eleanor had always played a carefully choreographed role, cutting ribbons, presenting awards, and making precisely timed appearances before retreating to the comfort of her controlled environment. This year was different. As festival weekend approached, Eleanor found herself unexpectedly involved in the planning process. What had begun as a simple inquiry about the animal shelter's participation had somehow expanded into Eleanor personally overseeing the creation of a community heroes tent that would showcase local organizations alongside first responders and notable citizens. We've confirmed the fire department, the hospital volunteers and the kids from the river cleanup project, Maya reported during a planning meeting held in Eleanor's library, a space that now featured colorful folders spread across antique tables and whiteboards propped against bookshelves. And we'll have adoption-ready cats in a special enclosure. Eleanor nodded, making notes in her planner. Aurelian watched from Charles's chair, which had become his official observation post during meetings. What about accessibility considerations? The tent location near the oak grove might be difficult for wheelchairs. The planning committee, a diverse group that included former board members alongside new faces like Maya, exchanged glances. This attention to inclusive details was yet another sign of Eleanor's evolution. Mrs. Whitmore, Mrs. Harrington said carefully, the festival committee was hoping you might consider a more central role this year. Eleanor looked up. I already agreed to present the Community Service Awards. Yes, but given recent events and the media interest in your journey, Mrs. Harrington continued, choosing her words diplomatically, we thought you might deliver the opening address as well. People are inspired by your story. Eleanor frowned. My story? You mean my unexpected adoption of a stray cat? Hardly the stuff of inspirational speeches. I disagree, said Marcus, who had become an unexpected ally after their initial confrontation. Your willingness to change long-held positions, to open yourself and your home to new possibilities, that resonates with people. Maplewood has been talking about nothing else all summer. Eleanor glanced at Aurelian, who blinked back at her with his usual inscrutable gaze. I'm not comfortable being held up as some sort of transformation case study. Then talk about community, Harriet suggested gently, about what you've learned about connection and belonging these past months. That's something everyone can relate to. After the meeting, Eleanor found herself alone in the library with Aurelian. The cat had moved to the windowsill, watching birds in the garden with focused attention. They want me to be vulnerable in public, she told him, straightening the scattered papers. To admit that I was wrong about many things for many years. That's not something Whitmores do. Aurelian turned to look at her, and Eleanor had the distinct impression he was calling her bluff. After all, hadn't she already admitted exactly that in 100 small ways over the summer? The week before the festival brought unexpected complications. The national magazine feature on Eleanor and Aurelian had caught the attention of a morning television show which requested an on-site interview during the festival. At the same time, a corporate investor threatened to withdraw significant funding from the foundation if Eleanor continued what they called her rebranding exercise. They think this is all for show, she told Richard indignantly after receiving the email. As if I engineered a stray cat appearing at my gate for positive press coverage. Richard's expression remained neutral, but his eyes twinkled. Perhaps they underestimate Aurelian's agency in the matter, ma'am. The day before the festival, Eleanor found herself standing in her closet, contemplating what to wear for the opening ceremonies. Her usual choice would have been a formal suit in a subdued color, armor for public appearances, but something made her reach instead for a dress she hadn't worn in years, a deep blue silk, with a less severe cut that Charles had always loved. Holding it against herself in the mirror, she was struck by how different she looked from the Eleanor of 6 months ago. The rigid posture had softened slightly. The perpetual tight line of her mouth had relaxed. Even her silver hair, now worn in a looser style suggested by Harriet, framed her face more gently. What do you think? She asked Aurelian, who was perched on the bed watching her deliberations. Too much of a statement? The cat yawned, apparently unimpressed with her fashion concerns. You're right, Eleanor said, surprising herself with a small laugh. At this point, I might as well be authentic. The morning of the festival dawned clear and bright. Perfect September weather that brought out record crowds. Eleanor had agreed to arrive early for a private tour of the exhibits before the official opening, accompanied by the television crew that would be filming segments throughout the day. For the first time in festival history, she walked the grounds without an entourage of foundation staff or board members. Instead, she was accompanied by Maya, whose purple hair had been joined by a temporary tattoo of paw prints on her cheek for the occasion. The Community Heroes tent is this way, Maya explained, leading Eleanor through the oak grove. We've set up the adoption area with these amazing play structures that showcase the cats' personalities, and wait until you see what the kids made for Aurelian. Eleanor followed, nodding to townspeople who called out greetings with a familiarity that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. The television reporter and cameraman trailed behind, capturing these interactions with obvious interest. The community heroes tent was larger than Eleanor had expected, filled with displays from local organizations alongside the more traditional first responders. Children crowded around a miniature fire engine, trying on plastic helmets under the supervision of smiling firefighters. Hospital volunteers demonstrated first aid techniques. The river cleanup team had created a diorama showing the before and after effects of their work. And at the center, drawing the largest crowd, was the animal shelters display. Portable enclosures housed cats and kittens available for adoption, while volunteers explained the shelter's programs to interested visitors. "Mrs. Whitmore," a small voice called out, and Eleanor turned to see Sophie, the red-haired girl who had first appeared at her gate months ago. "Come see what we made." Sophie grabbed Eleanor's hand without hesitation, another new experience, and pulled her toward a large poster board display titled "The Hero Cat of Maplewood." Children's artwork surrounded newspaper clippings about Aurelian, along with photographs of the cat in various locations around town. "We all drew pictures of Aurelian," Sophie explained proudly. "And we wrote stories about him too. Miss Jenkins helped us make it into a book." A young teacher stepped forward, holding a bound collection of papers. "The third-grade class was so inspired by the story of how Aurelian changed your life and the town that we created this as our start-of-year project." She handed the homemade book to Eleanor. "We'd be honored if you'd accept it." Eleanor took the book, unexpectedly moved by the childish drawings of a grey cat with oversized amber eyes. "This is very thoughtful," she managed, her voice not quite steady. "Are you going to bring Aurelian to the festival?" Sophie asked eagerly. "Everybody wants to meet him." Eleanor shook her head. "I'm afraid Aurelian prefers quiet to crowds, but I'll be sure to tell him about this wonderful tribute." As she moved through the festival grounds toward the main stage where she would deliver the opening address, Eleanor found herself greeted warmly by people who had once regarded her with cautious respect at best, thinly veiled fear at worst. The television crew captured these interactions, the reporter occasionally asking questions about the changes in the community's perception. "You've become quite popular," the reporter observed. "How does that feel after being known as, forgive me, something of an intimidating figure in Maplewood?" Eleanor paused, considering her answer carefully. "I've learned that respect and warmth aren't mutually exclusive," she said finally. "For many years I believed that maintaining a certain distance was necessary for effective leadership. Recent experiences have adjusted that perspective." By the time Eleanor reached the main stage, the festival grounds were packed with attendees. She took her seat among the local officials, reviewing her prepared remarks one last time. The speech was polished and appropriate, focusing on the historical significance of the festival and the importance of community traditions. Safe territory that wouldn't reveal too much of her personal journey. But as the mayor finished his introduction and Eleanor approached the podium, a commotion at the back of the crowd caught her attention. People were turning, pointing, a ripple of movement spreading through the audience toward the stage. And then she saw it, a streak of grey fur weaving between legs, moving purposefully toward the front. Somehow, impossibly, Aurelian had escaped the house and tracked her to the festival grounds over a mile from the estate. "Is that—" the mayor began, squinting into the crowd. "Aurelian!" Sophie's voice rang out from somewhere in the audience. "Look, it's Aurelian." The cat had reached the steps to the stage now, climbing them with deliberate dignity before crossing to Eleanor's side. The crowd murmured, then broke into spontaneous applause as Aurelian sat beside the podium, looking for all the world like he belonged there. Eleanor stared at him in disbelief. "How did you get here?" she whispered. Aurelian merely blinked at her, then did something unprecedented. He stood on his hind legs and placed his front paws on her leg, as if asking to be lifted up. Without thinking, Eleanor picked him up. The weight of him in her arms felt right, familiar, grounding. The audience's applause grew louder. Looking out at the sea of faces, people she had known distantly for years, but was only now beginning to truly see, Eleanor made a split-second decision. She set her prepared remarks aside. "Good morning," she began, her voice stronger than she had expected. "As you can see, I've been joined by an unexpected guest, though perhaps I shouldn't be surprised. Aurelian has been directing the course of events since the night he appeared at my gate during a spring storm." She paused, feeling Aurelian's purr vibrating against her chest. The audience was silent now, attentive in a way they had never been during her previous formal addresses. "Many of you know that I've had strong opinions about animals in the past," she continued, earning a few knowing chuckles from the crowd. What you may not know is why. The truth is, I spent most of my life believing that emotional attachment was a liability, that caring too deeply meant making yourself vulnerable to loss. Eleanor took a breath, surprised by her own willingness to share something so personal. When my husband Charles died, I retreated behind the walls we had built together, literal and figurative. I convinced myself that strength meant self-sufficiency, that independence meant isolation. I was wrong. Aurelian shifted in her arms, settling more comfortably as she continued. This cat, this ordinary stray with extraordinary timing, showed me that the walls I thought were protecting me were actually cutting me off from everything that matters, from community, from connection, from the messy, unpredictable joy of being part of something larger than myself. Eleanor looked down at Aurelian, who gazed back at her with those penetrating amber eyes. The irony isn't lost on me that it took a creature who never speaks to teach me how to listen, that it took a stray to show me the meaning of home. She looked up, meeting the eyes of people she had known for decades but was only now beginning to understand. Maplewood has always been generous with the Whitmore name. You've accepted our philanthropy, attended our events, honored our legacy. But I realize now that I've been holding the most important thing back, myself. The audience was rapt now, the television cameras capturing what no one had ever seen before. Eleanor Whitmore, vulnerable and authentic, a cat in her arms and tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. This festival celebrates heritage, the traditions and values that connect our past to our future. My heritage taught me the importance of legacy, of leaving something meaningful behind. What Aurelian taught me is that the most meaningful legacy isn't built in stone or measured in dollars. It's built in relationships, in moments of connection, in the courage to let yourself be known. Eleanor stroked Aurelian's head, feeling a lifetime of rigid control giving way to something new. Not chaos, as she had feared, but a different kind of strength. So today, as we celebrate what makes Maplewood special, I'm honored to stand before you not just as a Whitmore, but as Eleanor, a neighbor who is still learning, still growing, still discovering what it means to truly be part of this community. The silence that followed her final words lasted only a heartbeat before erupting into a standing ovation. Eleanor felt her cheeks flush with unexpected emotion as she descended the stairs, Aurelian still cradled in her arms. "That was nothing like your prepared remarks," the mayor said when she rejoined him, sounding both shocked and impressed. "No," Eleanor agreed, "it wasn't." The rest of the day passed in a blur of conversations and connections. Aurelian, apparently satisfied with his dramatic entrance, allowed himself to be admired by a steady stream of children and adults. Eleanor found herself engaged in more genuine interactions in those few hours than in the previous decade, discussing everything from gardening techniques to favorite books with people she had previously acknowledged only with polite nods. By late afternoon, when the television crew gathered with Eleanor for a final interview near the Community Heroes tent, news of her speech had spread beyond Maplewood. Social media posts about the cat who changed the Ice Queen were being shared nationally, and the reporter informed Eleanor that their segment had been upgraded to a feature. "People are connecting with your story in a powerful way," she explained. "There's something universal about it, about being awakened to what matters by an unexpected catalyst." Eleanor glanced at Aurelian, who was now dozing contentedly in a patch of sunlight near the shelter's adoption area. "He's an ordinary cat who did an extraordinary thing," she said. "He made me see myself clearly for the first time in years." "And what did you see?" the reporter asked. Eleanor considered the question, thinking of the photograph of Charles that Aurelian had somehow unearthed, the younger, happier version of herself smiling beside her husband. "I saw someone who had forgotten that strength and vulnerability aren't opposites, that they're complementary parts of being fully human." Later that evening, as Eleanor and Aurelian returned to the mansion, which somehow felt more like home than it had in years, Richard greeted them with a small stack of messages. The festival committee called to say adoption rates at the shelter booth were the highest in history, he reported. The mayor wants to discuss expanding the Community Heroes program year-round, and Ms. Hayes from the Gazette would like to interview you for a follow-up piece on the Foundation's new initiatives. Eleanor nodded, still processing the day's events. "And the board members? Any reaction to my rather unorthodox speech?" Richard smiled. Marcus called. He said, and I quote, "Charles would have been bursting with pride." That night, Eleanor sat in the library, once a sanctuary of isolation, now the heart of a home slowly coming back to life. Aurelian curled beside her in Charles's chair, purring contentedly. "You know," she told the cat, "when you first appeared at my gate, I thought you were an inconvenience, then a curiosity, then a catalyst." She reached out to stroke his soft fur. "But you're really something much simpler and more important, aren't you? Your family." Aurelian opened one amber eye, regarding her with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see straight through to her heart. Then he stretched, climbed into her lap, and settled in as if he had always belonged there. Outside the window, Eleanor could see lights from neighboring homes twinkling in the evening darkness. No longer distant beacons of lives separate from her own, but connections in a community she was finally part of. The headlines the next day would call it "The Speech That Changed a Town." The national magazine would rename their feature "How a Stray Cat Opened an Heiress's Heart." The television segment would go viral, shared by millions who found hope in the story of an unlikely bond that broke through walls built over a lifetime. But for Eleanor, the most profound headline was the one no one else would ever read, the one written in the quiet moments of connection that now filled her days. In the children who stopped by the now open gates after school to visit Aurelian, in the community meetings hosted in the mansion's once empty rooms, in the shelter volunteers who had become friends rather than charity cases. 6 months after a rain-soaked cat appeared at her gate, Eleanor Whitmore had discovered what Charles had always known, that a life defined by what you keep out is infinitely smaller than one defined by what you let in. And as Aurelian purred in her lap, eyes closed in perfect contentment, Eleanor realized that sometimes the most important journeys don't require traveling at all. Sometimes they simply require opening the door and having the courage to see who's waiting on the other side. In homes across Maplewood that evening, parents told their children the story of Aurelian, the ordinary stray who changed an extraordinary woman. Teachers planned lessons around the community spirit exemplified by the festival. The animal shelter counted a record number of donations and adoption applications. And in living rooms across America, as the television feature aired on the evening news, people watched the story of Eleanor and Aurelian with tears in their eyes and their own pets close at hand, reminded of a simple truth that transcended one town and one woman's journey, that no heart is too closed to be opened, that no wall is too high to be breached, that sometimes the most profound transformations begin with the smallest gestures of connection. And that love, once admitted, has a way of multiplying beyond all expectation, reaching not just one life but an entire community. The headline that truly mattered was the one written not in newspapers, but in the transformed heart of a woman who had rediscovered what it meant to belong, to a home, to a community, and to the remarkable grey cat with amber eyes who had shown her the way back to herself.